Hey everybody, welcome back to Daniel's Side of the Story, where I go through that week's chapter of the story and I share some of my thoughts, some of my reflections, just different things as I read through that chapter, just to help spark some discussion and some conversations in your home, in your small group, or maybe even just in your own heart as you yourself are reading through the story. Just to give you a different perspective, maybe hear something you didn't think about on your own, just to help keep that conversation going as we move throughout our weeks. This week is chapter 20, and we are reading through the story of Esther. We're kind of seeing, what role does Esther play in the upper story, in the whole story as we move throughout the scriptures. I really enjoyed how Brian talked about chiasm this past Sunday, and how this book and this story serves as a chiastic point in the biblical narrative, and we can see some of the parallels that way. Also, a quick side note, as I was reading through, I was really reminded of the story of Daniel as well. When I went through chapter 20 today, I was reminded of how, Esther, she was selected from the people, and she gained the favor of her caretaker, and she was being prepared to enter into the king's court. I think there's some really interesting similarities there. But the main point that I wanted to talk about, the main thing that really stuck out to me as I read through this chapter, was how many times people just seem to be in the right place at the right time. In the right place at the right time. We see, at the very beginning, we see this happen with Mordecai, when he just so happens to be sitting by the king's gate when he overhears a conspiracy against the king's life. And in the end, this coincidence ends up leading to Mordecai gaining the favor of the king. I mean, he saves his life, and the king is grateful for that. And we see how that plays out later on, all because Mordecai just so happens to be in the right place at the right time. More so, we also see that Esther is the one who just so happens to gain the favor of the king, and she's placed in a position where she's able to enter into the king's court. Now, don't get the situation wrong, though. Esther was still taking a great risk. She wasn't supposed to just walk in unannounced. But because of her position, she had just a little bit more of an edge, just a little bit of that foot in the door that allowed her to take that risk without knowing 100% that she would be executed, really. She just so happened to be chosen. And in the end, that position is used where she's able to take a risk and make a move that ends up saving her people from Haman. And again, the very night that Haman plots to kill Mordecai, the king just so happens to have difficulty falling asleep, and he ends up going through his records, and he's reminded of Mordecai's goodness to him. He also remembers that Mordecai wasn't really thanked. Nothing happened to express the gratitude of the king, despite the fact that Mordecai just so happened to be in the right place at the right time, and he saved the king's life. So, once again, Haman is plotting to have Mordecai killed, and yet the king just so happens to want to honor Mordecai, to thank him. And he actually ends up making Haman be the one to honor Mordecai. Just so happens at the same time that Haman was plotting to kill him. We also see that Haman, he sets up this pole, 50 cubits high, around 75 feet, some would say, sets up this pole in his own backyard in order to execute Mordecai. And yet Haman is the one who ends up being executed on that pole. This story of Esther is just filled with irony, filled with coincidences. that just end up reversing the plan of destruction against the Jews and ends up uniting the Jews instead and placing them in positions of power. We see plots to completely wipe out and destroy the Jewish people from the kingdom. And instead, we end up having Esther as the queen, and we have Mordecai placed in Haman's position, in a place of power and authority. All because of a series of coincidences, a series of people being in the right place at the right time, or having just the right thought to spark an action. And there comes to a point when I'm reading through this story, I can't help but wonder, how could this happen if it wasn't for God? When I read through the story of Esther, I'm seeing examples of God moving just a little bit, just subtly, behind the scenes. God is moving for his people, and he saves them from their enemies, from any opposition that may come up. God is moving behind the scenes, and he's working in a way to make it so that his people can be safe. And as I read through this, and I see this in the story of Esther, in the story, I can't help but wonder if God is doing that still. In the same way that God has been with his people in the past, we see him with his people when they're in Egypt. He's with his people when they're in the wilderness, and he is with his people when they're in exile. And here we can see that God is still with his people. And I'm encouraged to know, and I have faith that God is still moving and active to this very day, working in my own life for the sake of his glory. And really, as I read through this chapter, that is my number one takeaway. God is active and he is moving. For why else would we be in a position that we are now? Are we just so happen to be in the right place at the right time? So as you go throughout your day, keep that in your mind. Why else would you just so happen to see that person when you cross the street, to see that person in the store, whatever it may be? Keep an eye out for those odd coincidences. It may just be God moving in your life. Hey, thanks for listening today. I hope that this gets you thinking about how God is moving and working throughout Scripture, as well as how he's moving in your own life each and every day. Because if you keep an eye out for it and you look for how he moves, I think you'll be shocked to see how much he does in your everyday life. Until next time, bye for now.